as we get ready for the Eagle offseason. Johnny Mack, football at 4. He appears like all guests on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. He writes, damage control day for Doug Pederson. How did this all go down? We'll dive into that. And also the bizarre nature of what happened yesterday is still kind of hanging out there because it looks like Jim Schwartz is going to be back, by the way. Some reports out there that the Browns are leaning towards an offensive-minded guy.
Well, that doesn't mean Jim's going to be back.
Well, I don't know. I think John maybe writes differently as we look at, well, maybe Doug, I should say, not John.
I'm just kind of being facetious.
Yeah,
just because Doug said it doesn't mean it's happening.
You don't think he would be that unprepared again, do you?
Oh, man, I put anything on the table.
All right. So, John, do you feel if Jim Schwartz doesn't get the job, are you now convinced thoroughly that Jim Schwartz would be back if he doesn't get the Browns job?
Well, yeah, I don't think he's getting the Browns job. I've said that pretty consistently. And, yeah, he will be back because he's under contract. I'm not sure if he had the opportunity he'd be back, but the Eagles can block him from making a lateral move. There are a lot of people that speculated that maybe Cleveland was shooting for a Josh McDaniels, Jim Schwartz duo, sort of what the Eagles did back in 2016 and sort of an arranged marriage type of thing. And I could buy that, but I don't think at this point the Eagles would let him out of his contract, so I don't think that's on the table. But, yeah, I'm sure Jim's not happy. Like, Doug's probably not happy. A lot of people probably aren't happy down there.
Yeah, I guess I feel, John, that while he's back under contract, I'll leave the door open for the idea that they still have to have a meeting and talk, and there could be, and I'm not just like, could be, like anything could be, but I could see a scenario where when Doug and Howie and Jim talk that there is not everybody on the same page, and then they kind of decide from there maybe that all parties need to move on, and then that can be couched as, well, he was going to be back, but then we all thought it was in our best to kind of go separate ways. But that's me assuming that there might be consternation when they talk and meet about how they want to move forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, you can force your way out of certain situations, and I think Jim would be well-versed at doing that if he wanted to do that. So a lot of it depends on how it moves forward. I do think when I go back to Doug's press conference, I do think he misspoke when he was talking about Jim Schwartz. And I think everybody puts those two things together. I don't think he misspoke when he was talking about Mike Groh and Carson Walsh. It doesn't have to be both. It doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. And, my thought process, and then Jeff McClain reported, and if you go all the way back to Chris Mortensen back in December, that's what this was about. Jeffrey Lurie decided after the Dolphins game, these guys were gone. And that was it. He shook his hands of it, didn't pay attention to that 4-game winning streak, didn't pay attention, evidently, that the Eagles won the NFC East. Now, that's not necessarily wrong. I said yesterday on the show, he might be right. Doug might be wrong. And it might be time, certainly with Carson Walsh. I don't know how you defend Carson Walsh. Mike Groh, I think, is more up in the air. But I do think this is the owner's decision. And if it were up to the head coach, these two guys would still be on his staff, and that can create friction down the line. There's no question about that.
Yeah, and it's also funny, John, the reaction, right? Because you can see the tribalism. You're absolutely right that maybe this is a good thing and that you have to accept the fact that Doug might be too loyal to assistants who aren't getting the job done. But, ask an Eagles fan what he thinks of Jerry Jones, and they'll say, oh, he meddles, it's great, he's always the problem. And ask an Eagle fan who likes the Phillies how they feel about that last press conference with John Middleton, and they'll say, man, this guy looks really heavy-handed and meddlesome. Ask that same Eagles fan how he feels about Jeffrey Lurie stepping in and potentially usurping Doug Pederson, and they think it's a great thing. Oh, well, it's his company. He's the CEO or the owner. He has the right to do what he wants to do, and that's because people just don't like Mike Groh and Carson Walsh. So they wanted to see them gone, so they're absolutely okay with it in this instance, when in other instances of other people doing it, they point the accusatory finger.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, depending on the day, I get accused of being an Eagles apologist or somebody who hates the team. And it changes on a day-by-day basis, depending on what I see and what I write and what I say. If they don't like it, obviously it turns in a negative direction. A lot of people didn't like my takes on Jeffrey Lurie meddling. Generally, I don't think it's a good thing. It certainly is right. It's his team. He can do whatever he wants. He can fire the head coach if he wants. That's not an issue. It's certainly under his purview, but you're right. One of the strengths of this organization compared to the rest of this division, particularly Dallas and Washington, is that Jeffrey has hired people and generally gotten out of their way. There have been exceptions, but this is rare, and it's typically not what he does. And I think Doug Pederson, at this stage in his career, has earned the benefit of the doubt to pick his own coaching staff. To me, that's pretty simple. And you should let him do that. And if he does make a mistake, then you learn from that. But you bring up Mike Groh, Jeff, and you bring up how people feel about him. It is amazing, and I've talked about this on the show a number of times. If these critics are honest with themselves, they have no idea what Mike Groh does. They don't know if he's good at his job or bad at his job. They have no idea because the Eagles have been very clandestine about how things are done. Now, essentially, Mike is a passing game coordinator. Jeff Stoutland's a running game coordinator. They really replaced Frank Reich with two different people from his perspective. And then where his job is similar to Frank, all the information from the assistants is sort of driven through Mike Groh, and then Mike can give that to Doug. And that's the similarities. But it's not a typical offensive coordinator job because Doug calls the plays, so you can't judge the offense on Mike Groh. But people just don't like him because Frank was successful. Frank won a Super Bowl. Frank's the head coach in Indianapolis, so he's great. And Mike's bad. And that's just not the case. He's a really smart guy. He's really bright from an offensive perspective. I thought personally he was growing into that job. No pun intended. But,
it's not bad.
Public-facing entities often get rabbit ears. Said that on Twitter yesterday. That's what happened here. And Jeffrey Lurie's listening to critics and fan base and listening to all these people and thought it was untenable to move forward with Mike Groh. That's not a good way to run a football business. It really isn't.
John, does Doug want more responsibility? And as far as control over his coaching staff? And if the answer is yes, then what has he done to go about it?
Well, I said yesterday he made a mistake coming off the Super Bowl. That's when you seize power. That's when you make your move. And Doug is more of a laid-back guy, and I think the Eagles like that. More of a good soldier than somebody like Chip Kelly, who was always craving power, always trying to get more power, always trying to usurp other people. That's just not Doug's nature. I do believe he would be, I'll just put it this way, he would be the first head coach in the history of the world that didn't crave more power if he truly didn't. I just think he's more of a good soldier. But this is the kind of thing that could rub him the wrong way for two reasons. I think he personally likes Mike and Carson. And secondly, and bigger, he's the one who comes off looking like a you-know-what. And, from a timing perspective, the Eagles didn't have to have their season-ending press conference on Wednesday. They could have waited until after Doug spoke to Jeffrey. They could have had it today, and maybe these moves were already made and you don't have this controversy. They could have had it on Friday. They could have had it next week. It's not like we're forcing them to go out there and speak. So whether he knows it or not, at some point, Doug is going to figure out that they hung me out to dry, and I'm the one who looks bad.
What's the relationship like with Doug and Jim Schwartz? Because we're hearing Jim Schwartz is his equal. Is there a problem there as well?
No, I don't. Well, they're not equals. I mean, and I talked about this before because a lot of people have brought up Jim being very close to Mike Lombardi. So that goes all the way back to the Mike Lombardi comments. And that narrative is still going on. That Jim wants Doug's job. Jim is trying to undercut Doug. But again, I go back to the Super Bowl. If that were true, if Doug thought it were true, he would have got rid of Jim. Because think about it. He wins the Super Bowl. They're putting up a statue of Doug Pederson. And, oh, by the way, Jim's defense got gashed in the Super Bowl. Tom Brady, 500 yards, 505 yards, whatever it was.
There was a record 600-plus yards by a team that won the Super Bowl.
Yeah. So he would have got rid of him at that point. And the second part is Jim has always, and I mean always, deferred to Doug Pederson. If you ask him any question that is a head coaching question, he will not answer it. Jeff has been there at press conference. He will not answer it. He will say that's Doug's call. Talk to Doug about it. He's always paid deference to Doug Pederson. So they're not equals.
Getting back to what Lurie and potentially, wielding his power, the fact that the quarterback's coach, who was also kind of maligned during the season, Press Taylor, is still a part of the staff, and everyone knows that Carson is very, very fond of Press Taylor, and they have a very good relationship. Does that even give off the perception or image that the owner is almost not usurping Carson, but usurping Doug? Like he's placating Carson, but has no problem telling Doug what to do. It almost feels like, if you believe everything that's out there, that Carson has more clout than Doug.
Well, the starting quarterback does have a lot of clout when he's a star, and Carson Wentz is a star. You can argue, and people will continue to argue how big, where he belongs in the league, but nonetheless, he's the face of the franchise. So, yeah, I mean, there's going to be some. You could, people. I forget who wrote about that. I think it was Mike Sealski. Mm-hmm. He was talking about when Bill Belichick wanted to move past Tom Brady and go to Jimmy Garoppolo. Well, Robert Kraft usurped Bill Belichick. Right. That's the greatest coach of all time. He said, no, we can't move on from Tom Brady. And by the way, it turned out Robert Kraft was right. So I go back all the way back and saying Jeffrey Lurie might be right. It's just naturally not a good thing for a relationship. Back at that time, there was talk that Bill was going to move on, retire. He was very upset by it. He's gotten over it. Hopefully that's the case with Doug Pederson as well. But, yeah, quarterbacks, it's like any star player. And more so in the NBA, if you butt heads with the star player, well, the star player is surviving, not the coach. So, Carson's here, and I'm not trying to say by any stretch of the imagination that Doug's in trouble, but when it comes to if there was a battle between those two forces, yeah, Doug's going to lose that.
Talk with Johnny Mack, of course, Football at 4 here on the Sports Bash Live 97.3 ESPN. So Doug was speaking on Philadelphia radio this morning, and he kind of said, no, I made that decision. This had nothing to do with Jeffrey Lurie. These guys were gone no matter what because I'm the man. But is that just Doug's towing the company line, or is he trying to get his message that, hey, I misspoke, and look, I have the power to do this if I want to?
Yeah, it's damage control. Even if he didn't have the source reporting, if that were the case and Doug was making the decision, unless he woke up after the press conference that night and said, you know what, I'm going to make a decision right now. Hadn't thought about it, hadn't pondered it over the past month, over the past 6 weeks, which obviously is not the case. I got to move on from these guys. I pointed out a number of times, he has gone out of his way to bring up both of those coaches because he was trying to save their jobs. That's why. You don't bring up somebody out of the blue. And trust me, nobody's asking about Carson Walsh in a press conference environment. Yeah, you get a question about the offensive coordinator occasionally. But even that, because Doug calls the plays, you will rarely hear Mike Groh being brought up during a Doug Pederson press conference because Doug's in charge of the offense. So you're getting the answers from the man himself. he specific, and after week 17, after they won the division, Doug purposely mentioned those two particular coaches and the job they did and how good they did to get these practice squad players and little-known players up to speed to be able to run the table in that NFC stretch and win the division. Now, if he was contemplating getting rid of those guys, that's not happening. There's just no common sense there. And so you just put that on top of the source reporting, and you go all the way back to Chris Mortensen. And then Jeffrey Lurie hightails it to Florida or wherever the heck he goes to get out of the building. He's not changing his mind. This is a Jeffrey Lurie decision. And I don't know why so many people are upset by that. It's his right. Again, I said he may be right, but he did it. So I don't know why everyone's having a problem accepting that.
Gee, I don't know. I feel like it's split. I just think the people who do have an issue with it are the ones who worry that, we may have got it right this time, but a meddlesome, heavy-handed owner can also get it wrong.
Part, that part I think is legitimate. Meddlesome owners are not good.
Right.
Now, I don't think Jeffrey Lurie is all of a sudden going to turn into Jerry Jones and start talking to us after every game and sticking his nose into everything.
Right.
But anytime an owner decides, you know what, I'm a football expert, and I hired a football expert, but I'm not going to listen to him. I'm going to make my own decision. If that happens consistently, good things are not going to happen. You might get lucky, as I said, in a one-off, one instance, and he might be right in this particular instance, but if it turns into a consistent theme, it becomes an issue. And that's every meddlesome owner in the history of the world.
It's also fair,
of professional sports.
It's fair to point out that Doug has hired many wide receivers coaches, and after Groh moved and he first hired Gunter Brewer from North Carolina, he fired him after 1 year last year. So maybe Jeffrey actually did exercise some discretion, kind of questioning why you would hire a guy right out of college. Then it doesn't work. Then you hire yet another guy in Carson Waltz, who is not a proven name, and that maybe was the tipping point. I'm not going to let him do it twice.
Well, I will say, I'll say that there's a lot of context to that receivers coach thing, and I agree with you. It's weird that you have so much turnover, but that was the first. Doug had zero power in 2016. He didn't want to fire Greg Lewis.
Right.
Number one.
Right.
So that was number one. 2017, Mike Groh did a heck of a job, and he got promoted. So there's no issue there. 2018, they hired Gunter Brewer very, very late because they won the Super Bowl. So everybody was kind of all snatched up. They wanted Sanjay Lal. They weren't able to get him. So there's the one guy they weren't really happy with. And they did move on after a year and then cut to Carson Waltz, and they probably shouldn't have been happy with him. And maybe Doug should have couched this and said, all right, let's get rid of Carson. Let's keep Mike. If you want to go down that route and say there should be some give and take. But it's not just fire. He wanted Greg Lewis. He promoted Mike Groh. So it's not as bad as it looks when you sort of dive into it.
All right, Johnny Mac, real quick before we let you roll out of here, it is a football at 4. We got football this weekend, divisional round, and let's get your quick thoughts on these matchups. Saturday, Vikings, San Francisco at home. Minnesota last week, I thought their defense was a big difference in that game, but this is a different defense they're facing this week. So how do you see that one going down?
Yeah, well, from a personnel standpoint, I think the Vikings match up better with the 49ers than they did the Saints. And I think they did the entire NFC a favor by knocking the Saints out because I think that was the most well-rounded, best team. So of all the games, I think this is the one most ripe for an upset. The only thing I'm concerned about, the Vikings just lost 2 more defensive backs. So Andrew Sendeo will be playing nickelback again. And they tend not to be good against 21 personnel, and the 49ers play a lot of 21 and run the football. Their linebackers are really fast, really athletic. Modern linebackers, they're great. Eric Kendricks is an all-pro. Anthony Barr's been an all-pro in the past. But they're not big run-stuffing guys. So that would be my concern. But of all the games this weekend, I think that's the one that could be the upset.
All right, Tennessee, Baltimore. A lot of people think that Baltimore is destined for a Super Bowl run here.
Yeah, so do I. I mean, that's the best team in football. I think they're going to win the Super Bowl. Never mind get there. And Tennessee is basically. I will say this. I think Tennessee is a more difficult matchup for them than Houston would have been, because you have a puncher's chance with Derrick Henry. Just hand him the ball 30 times, shorten the game. Hopefully he has another big 150, 160-yard game. And if you get to the fourth quarter and it's a one-score game, you never know. Bounce of the football, that type of thing. I think that's the hope the Titans have, and I don't think the Texans would have even had that hope.
Yeah, you got Andy Reid falling short again?
No, not this week. AFC Championship game. I think this is the one blowout game. I think the Chiefs are going to just destroy the Texans. That's not a good football team. They should have lost to the Bills, really. Superman play by Deshaun Watson. Terrible game plan by Bill O'Brien. Bills weren't ready. Obviously, they're a young team trying to learn. Should have won the game. So I think the Texans are lucky to even get there. And they have a puncher's chance, too, because Deshaun Watson is so spectacular. But that's just – they're not in the Chiefs league.
All right, and then you got Seahawks, Packers. You got Russell Wilson on the road. He's been magical.
Well, I almost saw the Eagles beat the Seahawks, and Josh McCown, a 4-year-old backup quarterback, had a hamstring torn off his bone and still got in the red zone twice.
Yeah, that was another. And by the way, did you also hear about who's the linebacker? Why is he blanking on me?
Nathan Gary.
Nate Gary had the core muscle injury and played all year with it?
Yeah. He just had surgery this week as well.
Crazy.
They should have come out with a non-injury report every week instead of an injury report.
But everything, I thought everything is going the Packers' way this year. And by the way, think about if the Eagles win that game. Josh McCown can't play. If Carson Wentz doesn't get through the protocol, Nate Sudfeld's the starting quarterback in Lambeau Field. That's how it would have shaken out.
And they would have won.
The Packers, everything is breaking their way. And, by the way, on top of it, I think they're going to host the NFC Championship game because I got to pick one upset. So if I have to pick one upset, it's going to be the Vikings over the 49ers. So everything is going the Packers' way. That Seahawks team, they're built on the run game, losing Rashad Penny, then Chris Carson, even C.J. Prosise. They couldn't run a lick with Travis Homer and Marshawn Lynch. They're on fumes. They shouldn't have beat the Eagles. Carson was healthy. They're not going to beat the Packers.
John McMullen, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Enjoy the football all weekend long, pal.
You too, guys.